The following is the conversation with Chad Sowash, who is one of the major voices in HR industry in the US. He is a co-host of famous podcast called Chad&Cheese podcast. He is a startup advisor. He is an angel investor. He is a husband. He is a father. Just an amazing human being. In this podcast, we're taking a little bit of a different spin. We speak about podcasting, about how he started podcasting, how he found his path in life, and other general advice for people who want to align their passion with what they make money from. I hope you will benefit from this podcast as much as I benefit from it. Enjoy the show, and if you like the show, subscribe and give me a like. Thank you very much. Chad Sowash, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, for those of you guys who don't know, me and Chad work together. Just want to get it right off the bat. Yeah. So we have some dealings together. My agency helps Chad and Joel with their amazing podcast. So, man, thank you so much for everything, I guess. At this point, I just want to know you better, and I hope my audience will benefit from knowing you and your life experience.
Well, our podcast is better because we work with you. So, I mean, there's a commonality here, right? We're getting better because we actually work with guys like you. So, again, appreciate all the hard work. Two dumb dudes can't do this alone. We need help.
As you say, dumb dudes who've been running their podcast, one of the most recognizable podcasts, maybe the most popular podcast in HR industry in the America. You've been running for 7 years now. How did it all start? What did you do before you became a podcaster? And how did you get to that point?
Yeah, it takes time. I mean, I talk to podcasters weekly who want to start a podcast, or they want to know how to become, HR famous in our case, or famous in their specific industry. And it's a long road, man. It doesn't happen overnight. I mean, and I'm not saying this 7 years. I'm talking about before that. I've been in this industry for 25 years. Joel has been in my co-host has been in this industry for 25 years. We've done the work. We have the networks. We have the relationships. We have the history. That's the key. And you can't just come in. I don't know how many quote unquote influencers have come to me and say, I want to be like you. And it's like, well, it's going to take you about 25 years. Right. But I mean, I was that person back in my 20s. And I was really shaped through my military career. And it wasn't really the discipline as much that I did need, but it wasn't the discipline as much as getting out of the country, for God's sakes. I was born and raised in Mansfield, Ohio. Very blue collar, very industrial, very manufacturing, GM, AK Steel. And I needed to see a little bit more of the world. And that gave me the thirst to see more. It opened my eyes to more that was out there, not just more from the standpoint of, beautiful oceans and beaches and so on and so forth, but people, right? And I think we get hooked into looking at our differences more than we do the humanity of things. And that to me is kind of like a daily journey. And it started way back when I was 18 and I joined the Army.
So it all started with you broadening up your perspective. And would that be an advice that you would want to give to kids all over the world? If they want to achieve more, you got to see more.
Yeah. I mean, our oldest, she actually did her last quarter in Budapest, right? So she was going to Ohio Northern. She did her last quarter in Budapest and finished up, and she was accepted to Johns Hopkins in DC for poli-sci. And she said, hey, can I stay? And I'm like, you're only going to be 22 once. And when you get back here and you find a guy or a girl or whomever, right? And you want to have a house and you want to have kids and those types of things, you're not going to have the same chances that you do now to be able to go and enjoy and expand your horizons. So she's actually now after living in Budapest for about 3 years. She's getting ready to go to Brighton and do her MBA there. Johns Hopkins, great school, amazing school, right? But to be able to study abroad and to be able to be among these different cultures, she's been to more countries than I have at this point. I mean, and that to me is amazing. Our middle and our younger kids, we bring them over as much as we possibly can, again, to expand those horizons. I think it's incredibly important to understand humanity when you do any job. I don't care what it is, any job.
This is really cool that we started on this point, because the name of the podcast is Be Yourself. And it just sparked in my mind like that when I was thinking about what I want to name my podcast. And actually, it's about finding your authentic self in life. I feel like so many people live someone else's life, or they do not fully live to their potential.
They try. Yeah.
Because of the reason that you just outlined. That we don't know what we don't know. I think Walter said it, or someone, that, there's things that at some point you just can't try because of all the obligations and constraints that you put on. Just as, like you said, at 22 years old, you don't have a mortgage, you don't have a wife or a husband, you don't have the limitations to try things out. So kids, try things out.
Yeah. Well, that's a beautiful thing about, understanding like the differences again between not just people, but countries. You take a look at all of Europe, all the different countries in Europe. Many of those countries are big on gap years, right? The US is not. You get out of high school, you go in the military, you go directly to school, right? That's starting to change. But in that gap year, you get a chance to somewhat find a little bit of yourself, right? And I think that's what Kennedy, our oldest, got to do in Budapest. And she got to do, it wasn't for a full year, but she got to do a little bit of that. And she's like, you know what? I want to find more of myself. And I want to find more of other people. Because again, I think life, again, and this sounds so cliche, but life is a journey. If you ever end that journey, you finally feel like you found yourself, that's sad. That's very sad. I'm continuing every single day to learn, to connect with people, to engage. And that's one of the things that the podcast has given me. Again, being in business for as long as I have, for decades. Now the podcast allows me to engage with more people and start to look at more angles of business and of humanity and the connections between those two, right? That to me, and again, the overarching macroeconomics down to the micro sides. So before, I didn't have those opportunities because I didn't have this vehicle called a podcast, called the Chad&Cheese podcast, to be able to do that.
So 7 years ago, you guys started out. How did y'all came about? Whose idea was it? Because was it Joel's or yours? Give it to us.
Yeah, no, it was my idea. I usually come. I'm usually the big idea guy, right? He actually had just started a new startup. I had left the biggest staffing or RPO organization in the world, Randstad, where I was the director there, building veteran hiring programs for companies like Ford Motor Company, and I was burnt. I was done. I wanted to get back out. I wanted to work for myself. Joel was working for himself. He lived in Indianapolis. I lived close to Indianapolis. So I said, you know what? I've been heads down for 2 years. I haven't been on the circuit doing speaking like I did before. He hadn't either. So we needed some kind of branding mechanism, right? Some type of voice box. Mm-hmm. And I just saw the analytics on podcasts, and they were starting to hockey stick, right? They were starting to get to that point where everybody was uploading podcasts on their phone and they were listening. And I said, you know what? I think this, and this is in 2016. I said, I think this is a good idea. It took me about a year to get his ass off the couch. And then we started the Chad&Cheese podcast, a lot from the influence of both of our wives, by the way. So they both, I was pitching to him and I was pitching to them at the same time at a dinner. And we're sitting down to a very nice dinner, and they both looked at him and they're like, "What are you waiting for? Just do this." And so that's where it happened.
Interesting. And that was the rise of audio podcast in America.
Yeah. Yep.
Because right now we're seeing the hockey stick basically in video podcasting.
Video.
A lot of people are turning to videos now. But I understand that still Americans staying in traffic, being, washing dishes, listening to your favorite podcast is just the way to go.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, and over years, when did you understand that this can get you somewhere, that this can be the primary source, not only of your interest and attention, but money as well? When did it become something that could actually pay your bills?
Well, one of the stipulations in starting the podcast was that we have an audience that say they want to hear this, and number two, we had somebody who'd pay for it. So on day one, we had sponsors. We came to the market with a pitch, again, like any startup would. So we always viewed the podcast as a startup business, right? We always did. And so we had a sponsor on day one. The very next podcast, we had 2 sponsors, then we had 3 sponsors. And then in about 6 months, and I attribute this more to us being able to target a gap in the market, in our market, and our voices being able to fill that gap, right? And our experience being able to fill that gap. And
talking about the product market fit.
Yeah. And then our way of actually vocalizing that, right? So HR is a very, very, buttoned up kind of, right? Industry. Well, we came out of it and said, fuck that. This is not about being buttoned up. This is about being able to actually say what you're thinking.
Yes,
and
sir.
If you were 2 guys, which is what we were, 2 guys at a conference, and you were at the last day and you were at a bar having drinks, what would you be talking about? What would that sound like? Do you think people would listen to that? And we said that the stipulation was at least 100 people said they had to listen, they would subscribe. We had 400. So we blew that out. We had a sponsor. We had 2 or 3 sponsors within the first month or so. So at that point, it was great. After 6 months, we started to see a huge explosion in our downloads and our obviously impressions and engagement on social media. And then in January of 2019, I went full time with the podcast. Joel was still working on his startup, but I told him, look, this deserves more time. I'm going to break away from consulting. I know that this can actually, if we put time and effort into it, this can actually be a primary revenue driver. And it wasn't too long after he joined me, and we were both full time on the Chad&Cheese.
How, though, did you come up with the concept? Because so many people try things out, not understanding clearly why they do what they do. Mm-hmm. Maybe why is a question more of an internal question of self, right? But I mean, how did you understand the gap in the market? Was it so obvious? But were you just fed up with people not being able to speak their mind?
Yeah, I mean, I was starting to get into podcasts, and I listened to a podcast called Pod Save America, right? And this was a podcast about politics, but it was an explicit podcast, and they were saying things that people wanted to say on TV, but they couldn't, right? Because they were censored. Totally got it. So it was like, wait a minute. This is how it sounds when me and friends get together at conferences, or we're on conference calls or things like that in our little safe bubbles, right? What if we got out of that safe bubble and we started to have the discussion like normal people? And that's the thing. And we're starting to see this in politics, especially in the US. We've got a VP candidate named Tim Waltz. And that guy seems like the guy next door. He seems like the guy who would mow your lawn when you're gone for holiday, right? He seems like that guy, the guy that you would go and say, hey, I need some help with my, with my garbage disposal or something like that. And he would come over and help. That, to me, that brings people in. It draws people in. Nobody was doing that. Nobody. Everybody was talking very warm and fuzzy and, oh, isn't that great? And yeah, that's wrong, but we should fix that, but they were not talking about the serious things that we knew they were thinking about because we heard them say it. So we said, you know what? Let's just go ahead, start throwing F-bombs, start doing whatever we needed to do, just get our voice out there. And there was nobody in the industry that was doing that. We had some that were saying that they were edgy, but they were just saying that they were edgy. They weren't edgy. We were fucking edgy.
So the ingredients, understanding how you are different, being blatantly truthful about stuff, having the experience, knowing what to talk about. That's the second ingredient. And having a partner. Can you elaborate on, would you do this alone if Joel wasn't around? How important partnership in your life and in business in general? And from your startup advisor, you still a lot of young folks. Mm-hmm. I have my better experience with co-founders. It didn't work for me. So I do understand that it requires certain maturity to make it work. So how do you view partnership? How important is this for you?
I don't believe my voice is the end all be all. Not to mention, I want to learn. So I need somebody else there to bounce things off of. And Joel and I think our listeners, it's funny. They actually say, I love it when you guys don't agree on stuff.
Yep.
I love it when you come to the conversation from different sides. And then,
that's true.
And then we have people that we interview on the podcast, right? And they bring an entirely different angle to it. So for me, it was a personal decision. I didn't just want to sit there and monologue. And I thought that Joel, there's a couple of things. I was actually in radio for a short time before I got into this industry. And so I understood morning drive formats and personalities and those types of things. And you rarely see a morning show host that's by themselves. Rarely, right? It's generally cheap radio stations. Howard Stern has Robin, right? And then he has a cast of others around them, right? Some of the bigger shows that I actually worked at with Bob and Tom, which was a syndicated radio show out of Indianapolis, but it was syndicated all over the United States. Two guys, they had three other people around them. So there was these different and diverse voices that were actually coming out. And to me, I thought, well, right out of the gate, let's at least start with two.
I think that the fact that you were friends beforehand helped. Yeah. Here's an interesting nugget that I discovered for myself. Actually, right now I'm hearing a helicopter just flying over my street, which we never ever seen. And it's actually an American helicopter saying the police, right? That I saw the helicopters like this, like playing Grand GTA or 3 or something. And
hopefully it's a Black Hawk. Hopefully it's a Black Hawk.
Yeah. Anyway, I was about to say that I do like podcasts where I invite guests. I don't have a co-host, but I quickly realized that the best conversations happen with someone who you have connection with, so you establish some sort of a connection because you're just more relaxed, right?
Yeah.
And you can dive into things deeper. So it's definitely a very beneficial idea to have someone around. But some people just talking on their own for hours. That's
great.
Fun.
That's great. Yeah.
Totally
I can't do it. I can't listen to myself. Not to mention, it was funny too. I didn't think about this, but Joel's voice and my voice are so much different. And when we started at the audio podcast, that made a big difference because there were other podcasts where there were duos and the voices were just too much alike and people couldn't tell. And when we would start to talk to our listeners about just the different aspects of what they liked about the show, they liked that obviously we argued. They liked that we were authentic, we were real, which they actually meant that we would, throw out the F-bomb every now and again, but they liked that they could differentiate who was actually talking. And I didn't even think about that when we started. So, those are different things to think about when you're starting a podcast, knowing that audio today is only one aspect and video is just growing so fast.
Tell me more about running a business because I know that you have a business that you wanted, and you said in one of your recent episodes that you will remake your old consulting business. Is that correct? And you're inviting Jeff Dickey Chasins to work with you, if I'm not mistaken.
We actually acquired a company. So Jeff is a friend, and he's been a friend for a while. He's getting ready to retire, and he was going to walk away from his portfolio of clients. And I said, no, you've got this great website. It's got content for years, right? And you've got an opportunity here. Let's talk about us buying it from you and starting to revive Catch-22 consulting. And that's what we started doing. My wife and I, Julie and I, have been talking about this for a while and being able to kind of like revive it. And it's starting to take new life. So by the end of this year, the Catch-22 group will look, feel much different than what it does today. They're going to be new players actually added to it. There's just, again, it's one of those things where you have to take a look at the market. And when you see such an enormous gap in said market, and you have the ability, the opportunity, really the want to fill that gap, start building a bridge. And that's what this was.
But again, in order to see these opportunities, you see, when you're saying about this, it seems like it's all so natural and it's so easy. It's not easy, man. You gotta really be all in. And always update yourself with the recent data. What have you learned? I think the question that still remains for me on the personal level, what have you learned about maybe communication or effective confrontation, or people in general as a podcaster over these years? I mean, you've done a lot of speaking gigs. Definitely it helps to speak up your mind in a more eloquent way, for sure. Having this practice on a weekly basis.
Yeah.
But what other things? Maybe I want to advocate podcasting. I want to make more people try this thing out, because it's really an opportunity to connect with people who you otherwise would have no opportunity to connect, right?
Yeah.
What are other? Let's go with pros and cons.
Yeah.
How about that? Maybe. Yeah. Let's go with that, and maybe I'll be able to add the list that you start.
Oh yeah, I mean, pros are pretty simple. You have a vehicle in which to get your voice out there, to get your thoughts out there. You also have a feedback loop, because when people listen, they're going to tell you what they think, which is actually, I mean, that is such a great gift. Our listeners, and they have no problem sharing feedback. My God.
They're not letting you to bullshit them. You have to be consistent with your idea. This is interesting. You have to be consistent with your ideas over all these years. They won't let you change the course.
Well, but the thing is, you have to be able to evolve as a person, and not to mention the market always evolves. So what I thought back then might have been true, because adoption in our space isn't fast. Now, that might be entirely different for the same kind of tech that happened 5 years ago than it did now. Huge difference, right? So, I mean, there are all those things, and we get challenged on those all the time, which is great because we get an opportunity to kind of rethink and readjust to the market itself. And again, as an individual who is talking to, I'm a startup advisor. I have about 14 startups in my portfolio. Angel investor, and then also, we're building this consulting company as well. It is incredibly important to have a feedback loop, to be able to have a time to think through what you actually mean. Taking it from your brain to your mouth and articulating things isn't the easiest thing for people. This gives you practice in how to do so. Our first podcast sounded like total shit. We've been able to focus on us, focus on the market, focus on what we know, and have great discussions with people who also know, because we're not the only ones who know stuff, right? So from, a pro standpoint, that's a long list. You get a chance to get your voice out there. You get feedback loop. You get engagement. We, obviously are on stages all over the world, being able to present and then also engage people, at events, even VIP events, those types of things. So there are a lot of pros. Now the cons, this doesn't happen overnight. And again, you might see, a podcast gain notoriety quickly, but that doesn't mean that they haven't worked years to be able to compile knowledge, experience, networks, those types of things to be able to make it happen. Not to mention, when Joel and I looked at it, I actually pitched it to him as a business, said there is a market here, and here's what the market looks like. Here's the podcast, audio explosion. Here's what's happening. Here's the top podcasts in our space. None of them are doing this. So, you have to look at all the different aspects of the actual product that you're providing. You can't just think of this as pulling up a mic, buying a mic, and starting to talk into it. You have to be focused, and you have to understand who you're talking to. I don't know how many podcasters I talk to, and I'm like, who's your audience? And they're like, they don't know. They don't know who their audience is. It's incredibly important to know who your audience is. Who are you targeting? Those are incredibly important parts. So the cons, it's a lot of work. It's a hell of a lot of work. And I once saw a statistic, I'm not making this up, I promise, that most podcasts only last 6 episodes.
Yeah.
Because it is hard work.
I think threshold is 20. If you get over 20 or something, you're already in the majority of people who didn't give up.
Yeah. Which we're over 1,300 right now.
1,300.
1,300
really? Oh my God. Rogan got 2,000. And you're like, I'm like, Jesus. That's so cool. I think on the matter of, to add the list of advantages and benefits, definitely network is expanding. I feel that just having the conversation and asking questions like that builds a rapport. There is just something about people. People love when you ask questions. It shows, especially if you're genuinely interested, right?
Yeah.
As a podcast host, you have an opportunity to invite folks that you're really interested in. Therefore, it facilitates a very nice and genuine discussion.
Yeah. And I also don't want to look like an idiot asking a stupid question. People say there are no such thing as stupid questions. Yes, there are. There are plenty of stupid questions. So when Joel and I actually are looking to do an interview, we do our research, which is, again, one of the reasons why, he has 25 years in the business. I have 25 years in the business. There was one time Joel said, you know what? I've been doing this for 25 years. I should be able to ask good questions. I was like, you know what? You can do that, but I'm afraid I'll look stupid because I'll just blank because I won't be ready. I haven't done my research. And he was like, you know what? That's a good point. Nobody wants to look stupid on the mic. Nobody wants to look stupid on the mic.
I remember we were producing the the one with Lord Way, and that's where you definitely fine tune the questions. That's where you really have to, especially when you're at the conference at Wreckfest. By the way, folks, Wreckfest Nashville is coming. That's something that we have to mention is going to be big and wild, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But I wanted to ask on this matter of just what are the like feedback? What are the things that people told you that made you course correct or something of this kind? Do you remember some feedback from, not maybe course correct, but little changes that you were able to implement from your listeners' feedback? That's really interesting. Especially criticism. Do you get criticism?
Oh, of course. And it was funny because when we first started the podcast, we had a bunch of people come out and say, you can't say that. You can't say that. And, you'll get blackballed. You can't say that. And I'm like, well, then we will, but this is the format and this is what we're doing. So you've got to be able to go against the grain sometime. But then we were at it was actually in Nashville. It was for a show in Nashville, and there were some HR ladies that were coming up to us and were like, "We listen to your podcast all the time." And I always ask, first and foremost, I say, "Thank you so much for listening. Please tell all your friends." But why do you listen? And they said, well, because you say what I've been thinking for 30 years, and you're authentic. And my next follow-up question is, okay, what makes you think I'm authentic? And that was where, and that is when they actually said, well, you cuss. And I said, so me dropping the F-bomb doesn't bother you? And they're like, oh no, that's a sign of, authenticity. So at that point, we were actually trying to curb back the F-bombs, and we were going to what we call a PG-13 model. In a PG-13 model of a movie in the United States, you get one F-bomb. That's it, right? You get one. That's what you're allowed in a PG-13 rated movie in the United States. So that's the model that we were trying to go through, because we had some people saying that we were too harsh, some people, and then we had these others saying no. And these are the audience that we wanted, right? And so I kept asking, and I kept getting the same responses over and over. So we dialed it up. We're like, okay, fine. We're going to go just raw Joel, raw Chad. That's what the people want. That's what they're going to get. And that is when we really started to explode, because people could tell that we weren't holding back, and they don't want you to hold back. They don't want us to hold back. Let's just say that. Your podcast might be different out there. Our podcast, they didn't want us to hold back.
On the point of stupid questions, I think that sometimes, I'm going to disagree with you respectfully here. I think that sometimes people want to hear you asking dumb questions or showing that you are not perfect in any shape or form, because that in a way gives them the permission also not to be perfect. I think there's so much perfection, beautification on Instagram and social media. No one's showing that they're in depths or they have problems. Everyone's just so fucking successful, right? Sometimes showing that you are not perfect, that you're imperfect, just enables other people to relax. And that's why I think we love podcasting, because it's raw, it's not edited. When we edit your videos for clips, I kind of limit. I don't want my editors to cut out all the because you think it makes you look like a human, not fucking cut it to just, you know what I'm saying, jump into. So I think the it's really underrated in podcasting that we really want people to not be perfect. We want people to, because that just allows us to be like that.
So Joel and I actually point out our imperfections all the time, so we don't have to worry about that, right? It's so I mean,
you actually make fun of each other.
Yes, and that's the dichotomy that we have, which is great. But then again, it makes me have a chip on my shoulder, so I can't ask dumb questions because people already know I'm flawed, right? So it might be different if you're monologuing or you do have a one-on-one. You can do all those things. But I do agree 100%. There were so many HR podcasts before we started that sounded not so polished from the standpoint of like sound, because they all pretty much sounded like shit audio wise, but they were like, it's like they were staged. Yeah. Like, I'm going to ask you this question. What's your answer going to be so I can get a follow-up, right? And from our standpoint, there are a lot of people who are literally, they'll say they were afraid to come on our podcast because they will ask, okay, so what questions are you going to ask us? You'll know when we ask.
Yeah,
you'll know when we ask.
Never give them the list or something?
No, there's never. Man. No. And
that's so cool.
And nobody has ever demanded a list of questions. And they know the kinds of questions that we're going to ask. They're not going to be the softball questions. And if it is a softball question, that's because we have a curveball coming up. So oh shit, wait a minute. That was an easy question. There's got to be a follow-up. They know something that I don't know. And that's the thing, is that we always want to try to keep our interviewees on their toes. And at the end of it, for the most part, the anticipation is always generally worse than the actual performance of it, right? So at the end of it, they're all like, ooh, that was easier than I thought it would be. It's like, good. That means you prepared.
Yeah. It's interesting that you said that, because just recently I had unsuccessful attempt to get a famous artist, somewhat famous artist, electronic artist, and he connected me with his manager, and the manager requested the list of questions. And and I had to do all the research and my homework and created this list, and eventually they declined. So for I don't think that I'm at my best thinking about what I'm gonna ask in advance. My brain just doesn't work this way, man. I feel like the person who I'm talking to, and questions just pop up in my mind. I don't know. So it's interesting.
That's how normal conversations happen, right? Yeah. And if from your standpoint, if you're trying to get somebody on famous. And I would just have a list of 5 questions and just throw them that, and then just never ask those questions. Yeah, then just never ask those questions, because once they're on the mic, they're on the mic.
Yeah. Interesting. So actually, just to wrap up this little topic, I remember in my business years, when I was running a business with my co-founder, he was so insecure when he didn't know all the answers in the world. And for some reason, I have no problems recognizing that I don't know stuff, that I don't have the answers. But he was really, really insecure when he had to admit that he didn't know something. Right. And maybe that was the reason why it didn't work out for us. It all ended with a conflict, and him and investors kind of helped me leave from my own company, which was a pretty traumatic experience for me that I'm finally getting over now, because I found something that I love right now, and I don't have a co-founder. I don't have a partner. I just run the business on my own. Yeah. And it feels just great because, maybe I would be okay running a business with someone at this point as I'm more mature. But yeah, I mean, it just requires certain level of growth, personally and mentally and intellectually, to just run things together with someone.
Yeah, it totally does.
The question about working on camera or being in front of the crowd. I heard from Charles Barkley. This guy. He's a pretty well-known
round
media
of
persona
rebound
now.
Yeah.
And he was telling that they were inviting different fellas who were exceptionally outspoken, great great guys when they were talking in person privately, but when they turned that camera on, something happened. So they got frozen.
Deer in the headlights.
Did you have this fear of camera, or why some people can't express their thoughts and be themselves, be their authentic selves in front of other people or just the camera?
So I was lucky enough that I went through training that most people will never go through in their lives. I was actually a drill sergeant, infantry drill sergeant in the United States military. So I went to drill sergeant school, and we were up on a platform training hundreds of individuals at a time. And we had to get into a certain persona, a certain mode, right? I called it God mode. But the thing is, to be able to get into that mode, you have to be an expert, right? Because you can't be questioned on anything that you're actually training on. You have to know because they expect you to be God, right? You have to run faster. You have to fight harder. You have to be smarter, all of those things all of the time. And so I was lucky enough to be able to go through that incredibly hard course and then be a drill sergeant on
So you were
Sand
barking
Hill.
orders. You were saying,
Yeah. So I went through that. And then when I got back into my corporate life, I understood, and this is one of the things that I tell my wife. My wife is an expert in her space as well, is that nobody in the room knows more than you do. Period. They might have different aspects of what they know, but on the core competency of the subject that you're talking about, you can say, I don't know. You can say, you know what? I don't know about that, but my experience says over here, X, Y, and Z, and you should be comfortable in saying that. But when it comes down to specific areas of expertise, I'm going to blow everybody in this auditorium out because I know that I am an expert in this space. So that gives you the confidence to be able to say things that most people are kind of cringy to say. If you are not confident in what you know and who you are, right? And knowing that we're imperfect as humans anyway, I don't mind being wrong. And if somebody helps me understand where I'm wrong, that's awesome. Because guess what? I just learned something. That means I'm getting better. That means I'm being even a better expert than what I was before. So taking the chance, being uncomfortable is what I preach on a daily basis. Getting in, researching things I know nothing about, talking to economists, talking to people who, and trying to really understand this thing we call business, we call workforce, we call economy, and how they all work together. I'm a kid who went straight into the military from high school. I did a little college, didn't graduate college because the corporate world sucked me in. And that is where I just excelled. And that's where I learned. And that's where I was on the job training, to be quite frank. So anyway, for me, that is the biggest key, is that you have to be knowledgeable. You have to do your research. You have to have those network connections, and you have to challenge yourself and be uncomfortable on a daily basis. And then this is nothing.
So in order to grow, you got to be comfortable in uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Always do something that you're okay. Just tap into untapped territories every once in a while.
Right.
Yeah. I think Joe Rogan's preaching about this thing that in order to perform in front of thousands of people, like giving stand-up, for example, he says that it's not so intimidating for me because every single day I challenge myself with things like cold plunge, right? The ice water that he gets into every single day, or doing martial arts in his young years. So he says that if you intentionally do something difficult, then the difficult things will not be as difficult, right?
Yes.
So you gotta intentionally create this zone on uncomfortable for you,
Yeah.
and go challenge yourself, which is super not it's not intuitive for human being to go do things that are super uncomfortable, right? So yeah, and I sit here in my apartment, and I think maybe I should go and create some sort of an event, for example, and invite people and record a conversation in front of a crowd or something of this kind.
Yeah.
That's the challenge. That's gonna be a growing experience.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it could be little things too. I mean, well, little things are big things, but I mean, it was funny because we in Vegas, we jumped off the stratosphere.
Yeah.
That's over 250 meters, right? And we jumped. I mean, it wasn't a free fall. We had a cable attached to us, but we had people that went with us. I was in the military. That stuff doesn't bother me, but there were a bunch of other people that went with us, even Joel, who you could tell they were jittery. This was something that made them incredibly uncomfortable. But after that, oh my God, this was a bonding moment, right? So don't just do these things by yourself. Do them with other people as well. You will find a bonding moment. You will find that time, that story, and those connections that you wouldn't have had before.
Chad, why so many people do the things that they don't love doing? Why they spend 8-9 hours a day, which constitutes, I don't know, the bigger part of their life, coming home exhausted, not wanting to live? Why they keep doing what they're doing? Why it's so difficult to change the entire course of your life?
Yeah, sometimes it's opportunity. Again, growing up in a very poor blue collar manufacturing town, that's all the jobs that were available. And those individuals had families, and they had to do something to be able to, make ends meet for the family, to keep, food in their mouths and roofs over their heads. So sometimes you get into situations where the opportunity is just not present, and you don't have the money to be able to get out of it. Especially when you have kids, right? So you feel like you're locked into something like that. Julie and I are at the point right now, kids are out of the house. I'm kind of like disheveled. I'm not even starched or anything like that, because we have a place here on the southern coast of Portugal now. We don't have kids. We don't have to worry about that. We can get out, right? So sometimes the escape happens later in life, but the big key is to have that point of escape and understand what it is and where it is. And then start to plan for that. And maybe the escape is just a couple 100 miles away, but it's just out of the town that you're in now. Maybe it's a side hustle. This podcast was a side hustle.
Yeah.
This was not meant to be the business. If it would have, I mean, if somebody would have said, "Hey, this is going to be your full-time business one day," I would have said, "Wow, that would be amazing. I would love that." But there's no way in hell. Unless you get out and you do those side hustles and those types of things, you'll never know. So just, again, push yourself, be uncomfortable. And I'm lucky enough to have one of the best partners in the world. And no, I'm not talking about Joel. He's great. But my wife, Julie, she is a very strong and determined woman. And she's a leader. And when I wanted to leave Ronstadt, she's an executive director at Disability Solutions. I was gonna take a huge cut, right? I'm gonna go from something to nothing. And she said that I'm confident that you will. I'm confident whatever you put together is going to be fine. Don't worry, I got this. That's where the whole thought process of support and having a network, and then also having a partner, is incredibly important. Joel has also been an incredible partner on the podcast. I pick up where he leaves off, he picks up where I leave off, and we just have this flow and friendship that it means a lot. And it means a lot that we're in business as friends. Not everybody can do that. We do have to take some time away from each other, because that's good for a relationship. But other than that, I mean, it's just great to find those partners.
Definitely, you're blessed with great partners, and for me, it's a point of it's a great lesson. that I gotta choose the woman wisely, because I've been told this on numerous occasions that your woman will be very, very fundamental and it's instrumental in how your life will sort of unfold, because she can either support you and in the moments of I don't know, like some sort of depression, even support you. And as you said, if you're taking a cut and saying, honey, I'm not going to be able to provide at this level for some time, what she's going to say, how she's going to react. Yeah, but that's a topic for a different discussion on how to choose a woman. Maybe
how to choose a partner. How to choose a partner. I don't care, male, female, whatever you want to choose. That's great. But again, it is important to understand, support is necessary in life.
For younger kids that are just graduating or not graduating or just thinking about starting their career or changing their career. Maybe they're at this point where, oh my God, the world is so open, wide, and I can do whatever I want. Do you think it's a good advice to look at what you really love doing? Maybe even if it's not profession, maybe if it's not a hard skill, something that you love, and try to convert your passion into profession. This is a signature question I ask on my podcast, because I'm an example of someone who was able to connect. I didn't directly convert my passion, but I had passion for speaking, for English language and videos. Here it comes. I created the agency where we produce videos, and I have a podcast where I'm able to articulate my thoughts and talk to amazing human beings. So that's me. But I can't say that it was such an easy transition, and it was obvious. So do you have examples, or do you think that it's a great way to start? To think about what are your passions, and then think of how you can monetize them.
Always, but it doesn't mean that your passion is going to be, your primary right out of the gate. Again, podcasting was not the primary. We were doing consulting. Joel was, he was a startup. He was a startup founder. So it's not always the thing that you start at that is your primary. So you have to take a look at the industry that we're in, especially technology, recruiting, technology, talent management, just the whole ecosystem is incredibly exciting for me. Being able to consult around it, not so exciting, in some cases. Being able to advise startups, I thought was, it's great. I love it. But the podcast, again, was literally a branding mechanism. It was a side hustle. It was something that had to pay for itself. And then it exploded. So I think, the big key here is you find something that will pay the bills that you don't hate. I mean, you can't hate what you do every single day, because if you do, it's going to take a toll on everything.
You like it. Everything. You don't hate it. You don't love it, but you at least like it.
And if you're lucky, if you're lucky, you'll love it, right? But always think of those things, whether you call them hobbies or whatever they are, that are side hustles. Those side hustles you should treat as a business right out of the gate. Now, if you want to get into a specific area, like, again, this is a great example. If I want to be a professional podcaster, okay, great. You should.
Let's take another example. Okay. Let's say gaming. A lot of kids love playing games. They can turn gaming into the earning opportunity. As he's a gamer, what does he do?
You need to do a lot of research and see how many of those gamers actually go professional. How long it actually took, because this is not an overnight thing. And just because you've been playing, your Xbox for 5 years, you've got people who've been playing for 20, right? You've got just, so you have to understand how much time it takes, and it's a job and it's work. And here's the thing that you're going to hate, is that thing that you love right now you might get too much of it. You might get burnt out, and you might have to put down the controller.
Yeah.
That's the hard part.
You ain't going to enjoy it if you do it.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. So, and if you take a look at like professional sports, you only have a certain lifespan in that sport, a career span in that sport, right? What happens after, right? So you have to really focus on those things. Just because you love it now doesn't mean you're not going to hate it later, especially after 8 hours of playing a day and then going and doing tournaments and then et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I mean, it's incredibly important. Do your research, talk to people who are doing it, talk to people who've been doing it a long time, and tell them to tell you the nightmares, not the great dreamy stories, but tell them to tell you about the nightmares.
So always try things out, but don't put all the chips in the middle of the table. You can start out small. That's what you're saying. You can always start small and then iterate. If you like something, but always try to believe. I think believing that this could become a full-time occupation is a very powerful lesson here, because it's difficult to believe. I'm doing this podcast now, and you told me that you might have a break if a famous person. I told you that I want to invite some artists on my show, but it appears now that they are the most sort of difficult breed to get on, because they have managers who are really sensitive about the PR activities and so on and so forth.
Yeah, the
and
brand.
I'm kind of getting, I lose my faith that I'll be able to get someone. But, maybe the time will pass and I will have the podcast with the most number of artists, for example, and I'll have world-known DJs talking to me on my podcast. That's something that I really, really want. So always believe that and dream. Believe and dream that everything is possible.
Believe, dream it, but plan. Again, you have to have, if you want this to be something that can be your primary source of income, you have to treat it like a business from day one. You have to understand that business. And if you don't understand that business, it's going to be really hard for you to actually make it happen.
Cool. Hey man, that was super insightful. Do you want to say something as we end the segment? Just leave our audience with some message from Chad from the most dangerous HR podcast.
Yeah, I think it's simple. First off, I appreciate you having me on the show, and if you're listening out there, it's important. And you've heard me say it a million times on the show already. Do your research. Understand that there are people out there that can definitely lift you up, and there are people that are out there that can hold you down. Get away from those people that are holding you down. Find the people that want to lift you up, and they will be able to point you in the right direction. The support network that you can have is incredibly important, because trying to do something all alone on your own is lonely, and it won't last forever.
Yeah, I agree, man. Thank you so much for being in my corner, and I'll be in yours.
Thanks, man.
You're looking for a quality video production provider? Look no further. My name is Sergey and I own Beverly Production. We are a video production agency from Ukraine. We help entrepreneurs to create credible online, offline podcasts and clips that drive interest, to promote your podcast. As a podcaster myself, I early realized that there are not that many podcasts that put an emphasis on quality and creativity, just making your videos look really, really cool. That's why we mix our videos up with different visual aids, sound effects, flashy transitions. We do dynamic switching and other cool creative things that just set apart your podcast from your competition. You can check our samples on the website, and we also help people to post the videos. So we take over YouTube management, and we can also run TikTok and LinkedIn for you. So if you're interested in something of this kind, don't hesitate to book a call with me. The contacts are available on the website. Thanks a lot.